So in this video, I'm going to show you the process for developing the Kevin Lynch analysis, and we will use Adobe Illustrator for this. We will use our West End study area as the prime example. So it is important to understand what we are actually trying to analyze. So in Kevin Lynch's framework, which is fundamentally concerning with how we read, understand, and navigate the city, and we will look at those buildings individually and look at those elements that help create what we call the mental image or the legibility of that urban environment. In other words, we're going to identify the paths, the edges, districts, nodes, and landmarks. Paths would be the streets, walkways, and corridor movements that structure how we travel through this area. Edges would be the boundaries or any sort of a transition, like the river or a major road, or even some sort of a noticeable change in the land use. We will consider districts that have a character or an area that has an identity associated with it. Some of the nodes, which would be the concentrated activity zones or areas like an intersection or a hub, a transport hub, or some sort of a public space. And when we talk about landmarks, we will identify some of the distinctive features that make that place or provide a visual reference uh, in that area when you begin to navigate it. So for this exercise, we will locate these 5 elements and we'll put those symbols on that map. We will also begin to interpret the urban structure. And when we're considering doing that analysis, we will ask questions like, what is the major corridor? What is the barrier? Where are the activities concentrated? What part of this West End has a distinctive identity? And when we begin to look at that holistically, we will see that this can be represented in some analytical diagram, which we are using Illustrator to do so. So on Blackboard, there are 2 base maps which are available. The first one is this one, which is the 2-dimensional version of the map, which is already under layers. Then there's another one, which is the 3D version of it. You can use either one of those to conduct this analysis. So to begin our analysis, what we will first need to do is to create a very simple figure ground diagram. So in order to do that, we will change the overall imagery, what we see on the map. So these are our buildings. We have some of the land use layer as well, but we're going to turn that off. And we're going to convert these buildings into a figure ground. So I've selected this this circle here on the corner, and that selects these buildings altogether. When I switch over to this swap and fill stroke or press Shift X, then that changes it to a figure ground image. And at this point, what is also important, because we have selected this, is to save this as a, so we don't have to reselect it every time. So we can go to Select on top, click on Save Selection, and I'm just going to call them the buildings and press OK. And now every time I want to select them, I can just click on Select Buildings, and that selection can be reselected as well. I zoom in, so Control plus to zoom in, Control minus to zoom out. So let's now begin our first analysis, which is we'll begin with nodes. Nodes would be, in this case, the strategic points where anyone can enter, or any point of intensive point from point A to point B where people would be traveling. There could be any sort of a junction or a major break in transportation or a crossing of a path, or any sort of a movement of shift from one structure over to another. So in order to do that, we will begin using the focal points or the rectangle tool, which you will find here on this on the left side. And if you left click on it, hold it more, you'll see additional menu items emerge. You can also do that one. So I will create a new layer. I will go onto the bottom right where it says create new layer. Click on that, double click, and I'm going to point to nodes. And that's the layer I'm on. I'm going to zoom in. And let's assume for this purpose of this diagram that this is a major node. So I draw that, select that tool, press shift, and that is one major node. That's here. Notice right now it's the same color, so we're going to change its properties. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to swap the fill and stroke, and now it becomes that. And let's make it a bit more prominent. So I'm going to select left click here, double click, and change the color down to something, let's say something like that. And now that is our node here. Next bit is let's also change its properties a bit more. So I go into the properties and notice that there is a panel that appears. It's called the stroke. And let's change its thickness and add a bit more dimensions to it. So let's make it a bit thicker, change the color to something maybe perhaps more prominent. And then we can also convert it into a dashed line. So I click on the dashed one and add something like that. So this is one of my major node. Perhaps I might actually just add this a bit more prominent and change the size. So that is one major node. I'm going to zoom out a little bit more and holding the Alt key, and I'm going to just add another node point here. So that replicates the same and adds another one down here. And I might say perhaps that this is another node somewhere. I mean, I'm just making this up as I go along here, but perhaps this could be another node here. So 3 major nodes that are happening here. Perhaps there's a station here, and I'll add one more. That's our nodes. What I'll also do while I'm on this is create a legend. So I'm going to press the Alt key, bring it here, and then go to the layers where it says text. I'm going to add a text using the type tool here. Left click, drag it here, and just type in major nodes. And then I increase the size. Align it. So we'll continue adding more and more layers and legends to this. Next, let's start and work on the paths. So paths would be any channel along which people can move. So these could be streets, and they can be the walkway, they can be the transit line. And we will use line tools as a way to denote all that is going on the site. So here we have the pen tool or the P. Click on that. And first, we should also add a new layer. So I'm just going to create a new layer here and call it paths, or some sort of a path that's, let's say, path bus route. That's the major bus route that is operating on this path. So I'm going to switch over to swap and fill and stroke. I'm going to make sure that it's on stroke. And then let's create a path from this point and it goes to the other end. So that's this edge here. So that's one major line. I go back to the properties, the stroke, and I begin to change its width. And let's say I add arrowheads to it. So add one on this end, the other on that end, right? And in terms of the stroke, we can change the color to one that suits best. So let's say something like that. So this is one major pathway along which people are moving through buses. Let's also add some other newer additional types of pathways. So if we go to paths, let's say create a new layer called path and bikeway. You enter that, Control plus to zoom in. And let's assume that, from this point onwards, it goes along and meets with this major artery. So I create a new line using pen tool. And from here, I say that at this juncture, there's a bicycle path that goes from here across and it travels. So keep using the pen tool and keeps going along. So this is the pathway that goes from here across. And some of it also terminates here. So I use another P tool, P command, and that's the pathway here. Now notice they are both the same property, so we can just simply change them. I can use the direct selection tool, which is the white arrow. Click on this edge and bring it slightly in, so using the left key, the left mouse button, sorry. And then we begin to add the arrowheads again, similarly. So click on that, click on this one as well. Go under properties, the stroke, and I'm going to reduce the weight slightly. Let's say something like that, maybe make it a bit more dashed. That's good. And add some arrowheads here. So, oops, that didn't work. So maybe not here. Maybe on that edge, we can make it so that is that size. Change its scale to this one. And let's say this arrow here becomes something like that. So this goes on. On this one, we can also do something similar and add arrowheads. You can choose any arrow that you like, and you can also scale it up and down. So we can bring it to 80% perhaps. This node, let's bring it closer to this edge. That's a node here. So that is our path. What we could also do is, right now it's the same color, so let's select those and change the colors to something else. Something more prominent, let's say, to that hue. There's also another tool called, we can secure the lines, and right now they're kind of jagged. And so we can soften up these edge as well. So I press Shift C and it opens up this. It's called the anchor point. And left click on this one, and you see it softens the edges slightly. And I can do that to each of those nodes. So just left click and slightly begin to make it a bit more softer. They're not as rough and sharp. I can also do it for the corner, something like that. I can tweak these handlebars slightly so that they fit what I want to. Like that. And likewise, any part that I want to make it a bit more refined. Then I use the direct selection and move the arrow slightly inward, maybe perhaps this way. And that is my second path, which is the bicycle path. And you can continue to add more and more layers to it. Right now, just for the purpose of this illustration, I'm just keeping it very simple. So that's that. And let's also now begin to add the same legend here as we work along. So I just add a new line here, go to stroke, and then add arrowheads on both ends just to show that this was the bicycle pathway. Right now the size is fairly large, so I'm just going to bring it down to 80%, and this one also at 80%. Oops, sorry, what did I do? %. So that is a bicycle path. Move this to the side. Press the Alt key and Shift, and I bring it up here so that it copies the same text. And then I double click on this one and add bicycle path. So that's my bicycle path. What I might also do is I might perhaps do it according to the governance analysis and add more, something similar to our bus route as well. So that would be another one here, and change it to bus route. In order to match it, I select this, left click on that line once, and then press the eyedropper tool. So I, the letter key I, and I just hover on that one and select, left click on that. It will match to that line. Then I go back to my stroke here, and I reduce the scale of this slightly so that it's not insanely huge. And I begin to change that here as well. Go back to the direct selection, and there you go. So that's the bus route. Next, let's focus on the edges. So edges would be any sort of a boundary between two different areas or more different areas. They could be any sort of a physical barrier, like the river that we see here, or any sort of a wall or a highway. We don't have that here, but generally those would be the ones that we would constitute as changes in some sort of an architecture or land use would be determined to be or classified as edges. So those edges, as they define the space and create that sense of structure in the urban environment, is what we're going to be focusing on. So one of the big ones that we notice here right now is this river edge that we know. There's the river here and then the land use. So we can, let's say we call it, this is our main edge here. So we go to our layers, create a new layer and call it edge. And I'm going to label it river edge. Now I'll use the pen tool again, same process, and begin to define this as but instead I'm also going to change its properties and make it a bit more thicker so that it is a bit more prominent. Make it more dashed as a line. And change its color. And there you go. We have the river edge here. Similarly, I'm just going to add that here and Alt key, Shift up and call it river edge. Next, we can focus on the districts, which would be any sort of a section of the area which has some sort of a distinct identity. We have in our layers land use markers already. So you can see that here. You can toggle them on and off, right? If I hide the rest, for example, you'll see that these are already earmarked as. So we can use this as a way to denote what is going on. So I'm going to create a new layer and call it district. Let's say we call it the residential district. So district dash residential. Right. So let's say that this here is the residential one. I'm going to select this and move it to that layer. So right click, once I've selected that, right click and go back to this layer, the new one that we had just created, and then go to arrange, send to current layer. Right, do that now, it changes it to that layer. We can see it turn on and off. This is what we can then use as a way to mark this as a residential area. So I'm going to swap it like this, and that changes it to a horizontal color, into a fill color, and then change its properties. So let's say I'm making it to green and add a bit more of an outline, but this outline is stroked something here, add a bit more dash to it, the dashed line. Maybe perhaps this is too dark a color, so I'm just going to make it lighter gray. There you go. And then the fill, this is our fill. I might change its opacity though, because this fill is fairly dark and is not very opaque. So let's bring it down to, let's say, about 60%, or you could just type in 60. There you go. So this is our district. So now when we go to on the rest of our layers and turn them on, we can then see that that is now visible. We can take this layer, and if it's, for example, right now it's above the buildings layer. So we drag it down, left click and drag, bring it below the buildings. And now we have this as a district layer. And we can repeat the same process for any other place that we want. So let's say, assuming that perhaps this is the industrial area, or maybe let's say this and this two zones are commercial. So same process. And what I will do is I'm going to make this, bring it to the district layer, right click, arrange to current layer, and then do something like that. Go to the properties, change its width, make it more dashed. Select those colors. The fill was that. Make it more dashed. Zoom in a little bit. So as you can see, that this is really thick for it. What was this? Was 4 points. I'll just match it to 4 point here. This one also 4. Change the opacity down to 60. And there you go. So this is our district, the commercial district. And now I'll add the same thing for our legends. I'm using the shapes tool, rectangle. Click on that one, left click, drag, and I use the eyedropper again and match it to this one. Let's say, using the directs to deselect, select the text, Alt, bring it up, double click on this one and call it District Residential. And similarly, I use the commercial one as well. So left click, Shift to select both, Alt, bring it up, then select this one, eyedropper tool, select tool, and then call it district, commercial. So we are now populating our edge, our legend as well. So in that sense, you can continue to add more and more stuff to it and export this as part of the assignment and submit that in. The purpose is, again, to identify the paths, the edges, the districts, and use those elements to better understand how the site is structured, that is how it is experienced and how it is navigated. What I would encourage you is to focus on clarity more so than the complexity. So the diagram does not need to capture every single street or every building or any feature, but be selective about what is important and use a very clear visual hierarchy so that someone who is looking at your diagram can quickly understand what the main spatial characteristics of the area are. I would also add here that there is no one single correct interpretation. The analysis that you would provide, the one that I have provided here, only reflects from one observation of the site and supported by the map that we have just created. What matters most is that how clearly you can communicate the reasoning behind the elements that you identify. Now, while I've just used a very simple way of explaining the techniques, but your assignment would be a bit more detailed in nature. So you will apply the same techniques as I've just demonstrated here, but you will adapt your own line weights, your own colors, symbols, or any sort of annotations as you feel appropriate. So with that said, hopefully this gives you a good, useful starting point, and you can now work on your site analysis and begin to translate those observations that you make and make it into a clear urban design narrative.